We're back. We are back. Gonna get a little reaction on the screen. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, there's a party hat. I got the
A little
party hat.
hat there for like a second. It's been a few months since our last episode, slight hiatus since the end of season 1 of our podcast. Raimy, it is good to see you here inside the studio. Glad to be back recording with you.
Absolutely. Should we pretend like we haven't spoken over these 4 months and this is our reunion right here?
Yes. Wow. You look thinner.
I am absolutely not thinner than I was 4 months ago. That's a lie.
Okay. Yeah. It's been a while. There's a lot that's gone on since we last recorded our last episode. Even I think our last episode actually didn't make it to the world because of some technical issues. But yeah. Okay, let's dive in. We're gonna call this the beginning of season 2. I don't know if that's a thing. We have to do that. We don't have to do that. But officially, let's say November is the beginning of season 2, which is right around when we started season 1 last year.
Yeah.
So diving in on season 2, our big topic today is going to be the last word on the GoFundMe fiasco, debacle.
Any of those will do.
Okay, so we'll get to that in just a couple of moments. Let's start off with maybe good of the week, or even in this case, bad of the week. But good of the week, you can start. Go for it.
Okay, so my good of the week, I know we use this time sometimes to talk about more personal stuff in our family life. I will say that the big change for us as a family is my oldest son, up until this year, has been obsessed with basketball and playing basketball. And over the summer, he decided to take at least a year off, possibly more, and has been instead channeling his efforts. He is now a regular climber, bouldering. He goes to a climbing gym at least 3 times a week. Sometimes it's as often as 5 times a week. He's part of a team, and there was a lot of, I don't want to air too much of what's going on in his life, but there was a lot of frustration around basketball that caused the move. But what I find interesting about it is the thing that I was nervous about as a father, as someone who played basketball growing up. I thought he was really going to miss the team element of it. I've never played an individual sport, really. Everything I've done has been a team sport. And the thing that's been awesome to me is, so he's on a team, but it's an individual sport, and the camaraderie and the encouragement and the lack of competition among them. It's all about personal best and doing your personal, and what have you accomplished that you haven't been able to accomplish until now, and your personal progress, not comparing yourself to other climbers, has just been really awesome to see. So he hasn't missed the team element at all, because he has a team and he's done a couple competitions, and they're all just encouraging each other. And again, it's been such an awesome change that I was nervous about, because I know how much he loves basketball, but he is all in on climbing right now. And I don't know. It's just a lot of lessons from there to unpack.
What is a climbing gym?
Hmm.
I never heard of that term.
They are real things. They're all over. It's niche, but it's popular among these niches. So there's different types of climbing. He does bouldering, which essentially are these colored rocks on a wall all over the gym. And there's different courses. There's different, they're short. They're probably go about, I don't know, 12, 15 feet high at the most, maybe not even that high. But depending on the size of the rock and the grip of the rock and how far apart they are from one another, there's different levels of how hard it is. So there's
speed. It's all speed
No,
oriented.
it's not speed oriented. It's just finish the course. So the course, again, is going to be if you can do it. If my son went to the easiest course in the gym, it would take him less than 30 seconds to climb up. They're really, really short. But the harder ones, you have to adjust your weight. You have to figure it out. It's like problem solving at the same time. How am I going to get from here to there? It's fascinating. And his upper body strength is potentially better than mine at this point.
You're nervous.
You're
nervous now.
He is. He's 13 and he can officially take me. So it's.
I think there's also another positivity there is when you look at the DNA piece here, as a basketball player, you can be a basketball player at 5'6", but the prospects of what that does for you in terms of the long term end pretty quickly, right? So alternative sports, which is a huge industry now. I was reading about it actually yesterday. Pickleball, there was an article yesterday about the pickleball championships. Israel won or placed or whatever it was. and these alternative sports for people to have outlets other than the classic professional sports. Um, for the person who is vertically challenged, let's say, in terms of like basketball, as an example, um, finding these alternatives, it keeps the team piece alive, it keeps the competitive piece alive, it's healthy, it's really good, and they don't have to feel whatever's issue they might have had at basketball or baseball or hockey or soccer, whatever, football for those are in the Middle East and wherever. Definitely here, and I had no idea. I mean, I know there are climbing walls in a lot of places. I just didn't know that climbing gym was a thing. But that's like such an interesting business opportunity to think about. Just climbing gyms. What do you need? Like a big, like you need like oh, it's not for now. It's a different podcast. Okay,
You need a space and you need a lot of those like foamy
and
mattressy things,
insurance. I'm sure you need good
and
insurance.
lots of insurance and lots of insurance.
Look, I had always encouraged my youngest to play lacrosse. And he still thinks I'm out of my mind because I think he's an excellent athlete, like a really athletic person, and he's in love with basketball, which is great. But like if he has designs on like a professional career in sports, it might not be in basketball. It might be in something else. So lacrosse always seemed like super interesting to me, but it could be, as someone else told me, team handball. Like that's not that hard a concept to grab as to what that sport is. And you just need a lot of athletic people. Last week, my wife and I were walking through Tel Aviv, and everyone was playing volleyball without their hands. So I don't think I can pronounce the name of the game as what it's called, but it was super interesting to watch. Everybody use every other part of their body to hit the, to move the ball over the net without their hands. So there's a lot of games. That's super cool. I appreciate your sharing. Yours, my good of the week. If you can see it just above me there,
Pictures.
pictures. So my wife celebrated her 50th birthday this
Hey,
past
happy
week.
birthday.
We've been celebrating in some form or fashion for the last week plus. Started with work celebrated her last week, and over the course of the end of last week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbat, we were celebrating here as a family. And so one of the things we did is we hung pictures up of different moments throughout the last 20 something years since the kids are all around. And just a lot of different celebrations. And um, it's just a very meaningful number to celebrate and to really be proud of, and the accomplishments. She's accomplished a ton, and my for me, she's been my biggest cheerleader and supporter in all the crazy different things that I have done over time, in terms of, well, maybe some of my career choices not so much, but of late, certainly, in terms of podcasts, in terms of business, in terms of the whole stint in the army, major supporter. And so I'm really good to appreciate her and celebrate Naomi Marilis on that occasion. I'm sure she's not thrilled that I mentioned how old she is, but our audience isn't so big yet. No one's going to know. Anyway, so that is my good of the week. And the other good of the week is that we started, I would say that, and then maybe we'll jump in. There's always a reason not to record the episode. I find like there's a million things going on, and sitting down for 30, 40 minutes to record or longer, depending on the subject, and then doing the editing work, there's a million excuses and a million reasons and explanations not to actually do that. And over time, they just compound, and it becomes, at a certain point, I feel like, impossible to actually get started again. It almost feels like, why are we starting again? But I'm glad we sort of put the pin down and actually got the cameras rolling today to do this, because there's obviously always a lot to talk about, but it's just it's just good to actually do this. I have a different podcast, which has also been on hiatus for the last couple of months, and getting it restarted, same thing. Has just been like, a lot going on. Oh, I gotta wait another week, go wait another week. And then you realize, oh, it's been, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 4 months, and you didn't do anything. And the excuses are really not great. So glad we've sort of nipped that and gotten this started again, and see where this goes in this season too, with everything around it. So there you go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I genuinely miss this. I
There you
genuinely
go.
did.
I'm honored. Here's my controversial take of the week. Just to jump in on this first before we get to the GoFundMe debacle. Um, Today's election day in the United States. There are some important elections. The one that hits the closest for me is the mayoral election in New York City. I am a New York City kid, born and bred in Brooklyn, and I voted in a couple of these elections 1,000 years ago, but not recently. Um,
No,
and this
no,
one,
no, no absentee ballot for you?
no, I haven't lived in New York City since 2004. 2004, yeah, 2004. So my address doesn't count. Although I do know plenty of people who vote early and often in New York City. I am not one of those people, but this one is a bigger deal more than some of the other ones over the course of time, just because the nature of the person who's the leading candidate, Zohar Mamdani, at the moment is leading in all polls and looks like the person who's going to win. Some of his opinions and some of his stances and some of his policy takes are rather controversial for the population that is New York City and the context of the world right now, and perhaps even wider. So, I'm not thrilled with the prospects of him winning. I am thrilled with the idea that you can be, let's say, a different type of candidate and actually run. I think that's important. So, someone of, who was an immigrant only till fairly recently, I think that's great. Someone who is of a different faith than the typical person who has been nominees or candidates or even potential winners in New York City, I think is a big deal. And that's good too, because New York City is rather diverse, so it's important to be able to see that. That does not in any way, for me, um, remove any of the distaste I have about some of his opinions on on issues. And I would say it's not just the opinions around Israel and anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. It's wider than that, but it obviously does center on that super.
Yeah, I hear all of that, and though I was never an official resident of New York, I did my time there. Spent 6 years there,
Did your time. Nice.
so I definitely feel that. I will also say that uh, I think, at least in my social circle, a lot of my friends saw this coming much sooner than I did. When he first came on the scene, I was just enthralled by his charisma, which to a
Yeah.
certain extent I still am. But yeah, they saw that coming before I did. It took me a while to sort of see what they were seeing, and now it's hard not to see.
Yeah. So, like, just I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but in his opinions, I mean, clearly we're two guys who moved from the United States and moved to Israel, and so we clearly disagree with his opinions on Israel and Israel's prosecution of the war over the last couple of years, and some of his very what I would call anti-Semitic and anti-Zionistic takes, and the crowd to which he surrounds himself with, real problematic, and I think somewhat dangerous for the community of people that are in New York. That's not even the biggest part of it. I mean, that's part of it because the Jewish population, family, friends, is an enormous population in the city of New York, and they're not sure what to do here either. To me, the other part of it, there was two. One was just economic. Well, three. Economic. He's not a capitalist. He's a socialist. And New York City is the free market capital of the world. And I don't know how you jive those two things together. If you're a wealthy person in New York and the expectation is that he's going to try to raise taxes in New York City, I don't know why you're staying anymore. COVID proved that you could be a very wealthy person in other places too, which means that wealth is going to leave the city, which is bad for the city. It's bad for jobs. It's bad for the economy. And to have someone who was really ill equipped and inexperienced at that level of ownership and management is, I mean, so dangerous for a city like New York, to have that in its place. It's just not the place where you start your CEO career as the mayor of New York City. That was one. Two, the whole thing with the police really scares me because I don't think the police trust him for anything, and that means that when stuff happens in the city, the mayor and the police are not on the same page. Really dangerous. And then if I have to bring it back to our world, just because I wanted to, he initially, when he was in the assembly, the one bill he proposed was outlawing charities that were attached in some way to the state of Israel, and in particular, the Israel Defense Force. And if I was any of those organizations, I would consider moving. Not to say that he can pass that law, he can't, and he won't. But if it's going to make it uncomfortable for people to continue to operate or try to run their charities or their friends of, it's really easy to move your headquarters to New Jersey or just Long Island or just outside the five boroughs. And then why wouldn't you? The same way a CEO of a business would make sense to move somewhere else that's more fiscally, to the betterment of your business, the same thing to your nonprofit. So it's a consequential day for New York, whether he wins or he loses. And if he wins, it has different consequences than if he loses, because I think it's going to have consequences that way too. And now I'll get off my soapbox.
I appreciate all of that. I don't know, just not so often that we wade into politics, and it's certainly not often that we wade into local politics. But I understand the importance of it, and we'll find out probably I imagine by the time this podcast comes out,
Yeah,
we'll know
yeah, I
where
would
things
think so.
stand.
Look, and as crazy as that whole election is, the politics here where we are right now is even crazier. So we won't touch any of the craziness from the last few days because it's hard to even explain, but or to believe that it's true. So we'll just leave it with Zohar Mamdani. The only other thing I would say is there was the one time during the offseason that the New York Knicks did a good thing. And when they sent him the cease and desist letter on using the logo and the colors, all power and all respect to the Knicks for reclaiming, their identity as a New York sports team that does not have political uh, aspirations or opinions. But that was great. So anyway,
Rumor has it that was Brunson's idea. He
yeah.
he came up with it in the locker room. So
I would,
yeah.
if it was inside the politics of what's going on right now, it's probably all the people who own the seats around the
Yeah.
around the court, uh, who sent that letter. But okay, I'm gonna have to edit that part out. Anyway, to our topic of the day. A couple of weeks ago, this huge story broke. I guess it's almost 3 weeks ago at this point. This huge story broke around GoFundMe. That was hard to believe when it broke. And then it got harder to believe because of how poorly they handled it out of the gate. But the responses from a lot of people were swift and interesting. And I wanted to have the last word, let's say, on that subject. Even though you and I talked about, recording this a couple of weeks ago, we just didn't get to it. And so here we are talking about GoFundMe. Just for like a minute, can you I'm sure most of our audience knows. Can you explain what GoFundMe is?
Yeah, GoFundMe is a crowdfunding platform. So people will sign up. Generally speaking, it was used, at least initially, for individuals fundraising. So not for organizational fundraising, for individual fundraising. So if someone had, a pile of medical bills that they were unable to pay, or had a tragedy in their house, a fire or something like that, and had to rebuild their lives and just didn't have the finances to cover it, friends and family would start these individual pages and say, we're raising money. I'm trying to raise this amount of money for this family who's undergone this hardship, and people would donate to it. And it was a really, really nice platform for them to do that. And then a couple of years ago, they teamed up with Classy, which is a company that works specifically with organizational nonprofits to
Yeah.
do something similar. They do some peer-to-peer campaigns. They do a lot of different things, but they are a giant among nonprofit technology. And GoFundMe sort of got into the business along with Classy, of doing more organizational fundraising. So they're still, I think GoFundMe as its own is still predominantly known for individual fundraising, but they have a very, very strong partner in Classy to do organizational fundraising as well. Anything, did I hit that? Anything that you would add to that?
No, I think that's right. They are the biggest player, I think by far, in the field. Admittedly, when that collab happened between GoFundMe and Classy a couple of years ago, I think they basically bought them. Um, I I cheered it and championed it because I thought it would actually be really good for the nonprofit world, ironically, um, because of this.
Overall, it might have been the last 3 weeks aside.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. It's hard to know. Like, they'll put out a report, and it's not clear from the reporting as to whether or not it's good or bad or otherwise. In the course of the last couple of weeks, people have been commenting that the Classy people, Classy from the company, not in terms of their person, I don't know them as Classy people, have left or moved on from GoFundMe, and that the platform is there and the work is still there, but the people who built the culture of Classy maybe aren't there anymore. So I don't know. Okay, so that's who GoFundMe is. Then what was the controversy that happened? Can you explain it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of detail, so I'm not going to hit all of them. You'll fill in anything
That's
that's
fine.
that's missing. But GoFundMe essentially created pages for something like 1.4, 1.5 million US based nonprofits without their
Mhm.
consent, and started collecting money on their behalf of these 1.5 million organizations. Now, there's a couple reasons why this was important. I think first and foremost is, even if they had done a perfect job of putting up these pages and collecting money, they did
Yeah.
not have any consent to do it. So organizations did not give permission for GoFundMe to do this. And on top of that, it was a very, very imperfect system that they created. Organizations needed to register to unlock the money that was given to them. That was not one issue that a lot of organizations had. So you had to sign up to get money that was due for you in the first place. Number
Right.
two is because there was no consent, organizations had no input into the branding, the wording. They could be totally misrepresenting an organization by finding online whatever text or images they chose to associate with the organization. So people were organizations were misrepresented by these pages. And I would say two other factors. One is that because GoFundMe is so incredibly large, they often outranked the organization for SEO. So if you were going to Google, the Raimy Rubin nonprofit organization, the GoFundMe page is going to be higher on that list than my website itself. So people were giving to this random page that they did not give consent to. And the last piece that I would say is that if organizations did not register to get their money, they had no idea that money was sitting in these accounts, which also means that donors weren't thanked. There was no communication between the donor and the organization. So organizations look stupid. They looked ungrateful and stupid because they weren't recognizing the donors that had given to them. And all of this happened in a very short amount of time. Again, I'm sure that's not the laundry list of issues that organizations had with GoFundMe, but I think that hits on at least the key points that jumped out to me as to why this was so hurtful to the organizations.
Yeah. I'll add a couple on top of that. Had this story not broke over the last few weeks, you still wouldn't know about it. So when they launched this thing, they said they made a public thing out of it last year when they launched it. I don't think that's accurate. And so it happened without anybody knowing it happened. People were donating almost like 6 months already without having any awareness that they weren't actually getting their money to the organizations. The organizations didn't know these pages existed. So to me, like that was a big factor. Here was one that I had heard from a couple of organizations besides the SEO piece. There's a couple of organizations that I'm aware of that actually don't outbound solicit donations. They handle their donation process internally and very specifically in terms of their outreach to donors. So they're going one by one. They're going to small groups. They're doing events. They're not doing big, grand public pages. So they may have a donate page on their site. And most of the reason that do is because it's easy for people to donate there once they decide to donate. But it's not because they're doing a 10,000 person email campaign over the course of a few weeks or end of year, not even end of year. They're just not doing it. So here now, suddenly there's a page up that says, "Hey, go donate to this organization." So let's say you search. Last year we used to use the example of Coats for the Homeless, right? And Coats for the Homeless comes up on a GoFundMe page. It looks good, sounds right, the story's correct. The colors aren't great because they're GoFundMe colors on the page. Okay, fine. And you go and you donate, and now suddenly this organization, their entire culture of giving that they have constructed very carefully over time is destroyed. And so, that's really bad to do that. And going back to what you had said before, the trust piece, which is enormous for nonprofits, and the relationship piece with nonprofits and their donors, this basically just, poured hot water on those. And in hopefully not too many cases, but in some cases, perhaps destroy the opportunity to support. You can imagine being an organization, you reach out to somebody and the person's like, donated 5 times last year to your organization. What are you talking about? I have no data. I have no knowledge. I wasn't aware. I didn't know the page. I don't know where they donated. And you've lost an opportunity potentially at a donor and a relationship with a donor over the long haul because someone decided to put up a page in your name. And so those things sort of jumped out at me as some thoughts. I'll tell you, just to shift it a little bit here, I can't say that it was poorly intended, let's say, from the standpoint of GoFundMe. Try really hard not to assume intention. But for the moment, let's assume that their intent was good, right? What were they trying to do? What were they trying to accomplish? And it's hard to know what they're trying to accomplish because most organizations have donate pages on their websites if they have a website. So what were you trying to accomplish by trying to put up donate pages for it, other than, if I'm going to be cynical, money and data around those people?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hubris there. I think that GoFundMe must have assumed or thought that they know better than the nonprofits how to put up donate pages, how
Yeah.
to that they're going to get more traffic than the organization's pages themselves, and thought that they were doing these organizations a favor, a solid, by saying, "Let us collect the money on your behalf. We'll do a better job of it for you, and then we'll give you the money," which potentially might work, but it doesn't work if you don't have permission from the organization to do it. Just like any company would never let someone else use their logo or anything like that, or sell their services or products without their permission. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for nonprofits to do that as well.
Can I shift to a part of the conversation here a little bit on it? Is you're very much a messaging and a comms guy. So they did multiple things wrong here. One was just the initiative itself. Two was the attempt at the apology and the follow up afterward. Can you talk through some of the comms issues, perhaps how you might have, consulted or contributed to how they might do a better job on the back end of, I'm going to use a local Israel term, that fashla, a total disaster of what that was and what they did, how they did it, and perhaps how they could have done it better, because they issued multiple apologies over the course of a few days. And only, I think, in the last one did they finally apologize. But take me through that whole part of it, because I think from the technical standpoint and appreciating the mess that they created for nonprofits, I think we've covered some of that. There's the headache if you're a nonprofit to now have to go figure this out. It's just something you don't like, more work than you need. Fine. But take me into the comms part and we'll come back to some of the other details after.
Okay, I will do that. And then I want to throw a question to you. I have a little bit of a hot take about this, but
Go
we'll
for it.
we'll get there in a second because we're gearing up to it.
Yeah.
We're
Like
gonna
leaving
we're
me
gonna
hanging.
No, yeah, I got to leave you in suspense here. Basically, GoFundMe tried to explain this away
Mhm.
and tell organizations why this was beneficial for them, even after a tremendous amount of backlash. And I would suggest that those of you who are listening to this, the place that I found, I know you as well, Benny, because we spoke about this, but the place to go and sort of look at the backlash is LinkedIn. If you go to LinkedIn and you go on GoFundMe's page, then you can see thousands and thousands of comments of people. Not even that people weren't hysterical. They weren't using, 4-letter words or anything like that. There was like very reasoned people were being like, this makes no sense for these reasons. Please don't do this. Thousands and thousands and thousands of comments. And GoFundMe was basically like, oh, that's a cute little comment. You just
Thank
don't
you.
understand the bigger picture right here. But once you see the bigger picture, then you'll understand. And it took them, I don't know, 3 or 4 tries to really get the apology right, or to get the apology at all, to say the words, I'm sorry, we didn't do this well.
Yeah.
They just weren't hearing the feedback. And again, it wasn't like it was like for every 4 positive comments, thank you so much, there was 1 really negative comment. It wasn't like there's a bunch of 5-star reviews and a handful of 1-star reviews. This was like 1-star reviews across the board.
Can I read a little bit of it to you first? Like the
Please,
first one? Here's the
please.
first one. This, I think, is from a week ago. Here's what they said. We heard from nonprofits over the last few days about our nonprofit pages and wanted to take a moment to address some of their concerns and share a few updates we're making to improve the experience for nonprofits and their supporters. Right there, they should have said, we're sorry for having done this, and we will work our tails off over the next couple of days to fix it. Instead, they went, every month, more than 100 million people visit GoFundMe, many of them looking for nonprofits to support through donations, fundraising, or both. In 2024 alone, more than 65,000 nonprofits received donations on GoFundMe. Our goal is simple: to make it easier for people to discover, support, and give directly to the causes they care about in order to help drive new donors to nonprofit organizations. And then I'll go Seinfeld for a second here. Yada, yada, yada. We're grateful for the feedback we've recently received, and we are listening. We're making several updates to improve the experience for nonprofits and their supporters. It goes on from there. That was attempt number 1, which garnered a massive amount of blowback because it was so bad, right? The follow-up, which was also a week ago, was the following. At GoFundMe, our mission has always been to help people help each other. This mission extends so on and so forth. However, we understand clearly that our recent efforts with nonprofit pages have caused confusion, concern, and distraction from the vital missions of the very nonprofits we aim to support. Here it comes. We are very sorry for this and take responsibility for missing the mark. The text should have ended right there. It doesn't. It goes on for paragraphs talking about what they're committed to and how you can fix it and how you can go now there to their pages and claim your page or whatever you want to do. We always have this thing in our house. If your apology has a but at the end of it, it wasn't an apology, right? It was an explanation and an excuse to, as you said, explain it away and make you the idiot for thinking for 1 second that we had done something wrong. And it's a classic example of, as you said, hubris. It's the nicest way to say that, of bad comms and a real lack of understanding of who it is that you're working with and your service. Like before you get into some of the other ones, if they had said last year, we had this idea, and they go to some of the really, really smart people who commented and say, we have this idea. What do you think? Right? 100% of them would have told them it's a bad idea. And 100% of them would have told them, if you want to do something like that, here's how I might do it and where it's beneficial for everybody in play, right? I know that you and I, there were occasions when at CauseMatch, when we were considering different features for the platform, as a coach, I would turn to some of my clients and say, hey, we're considering this. What do you think about this feature? Because that's real world feedback from people who are actually using the product, like the platform, and getting their input. Hey, it's good for customer, relationships, but also for your product to know whether or not this is going to be a good idea or a bad idea. And there's some things that we scrubbed at the time and some things that we fixed. And there's some things that we couldn't do, but whatever they were, it's better business than saying, please move over to the side. We know better. 65,000 organizations are benefiting. The irony of that number is they did it for 1,000,004. 65,000, right, is a bit of a rounding error for 1,000,004 nonprofits. So yeah, go on.
It's interesting because as you said, first of all, you said one thing earlier in this conversation that I didn't know, which is that it would make sense if a bunch of the classy people weren't no longer there and weren't involved. I mean, if GoFundMe is essentially running without one voice, let alone several voices representing nonprofits, then like that's really bad because the classy folks certainly know nonprofits, and I would
Yeah.
like to think that they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening here. So that's interesting to me. The other thing that I just thought is interesting, I hadn't thought of this until now, until you were talking, but I feel like there's been a real push certainly in the startup world for sort of like knowing better than the customer, right? The quote that's thrown around is what the Henry Ford quote. If I would
Yeah.
have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Right.
Steve Jobs famously hated focus groups. Like he knew. And I feel like there's this push to like try and outthink your target demographic. But the problem is that Henry Ford and Steve Jobs, for the most part, they had many errors in their lives as well, their business lives as well. But for the most part, they were right about what their target demographic needed and wanted. And GoFundMe just missed the mark here. And I'm sure, I don't know Apple well enough to know, but I'm sure of Steve Jobs, when Steve Jobs rolled something out and it didn't sell and it wasn't good, then he cut his losses and moved on to the next thing. And it just feels like GoFundMe here took the opposite approach of digging in their heels and saying, "No, we're gonna we're gonna do this." So just interesting. I
Here's
don't
a
know.
couple things I'll share with you that I think are still out there, which makes this still a debacle for them. One, there's no transparency about how much money actually was donated on
Yeah,
those pages, especially the tipping, which is what the money they keep, which was obnoxious at 16%,
we didn't talk about that at all. The default tip was what, 15, 16%? Is that what it was?
which is, I mean, obscene. And that money goes to them, right? They're the platform. That's money to defray costs for the platform. A lot of the platforms do it, which is fine. And it's upfront and it's there. But if a person is new and doesn't realize, they simply just pay it and they don't realize. I recently was involved in a fundraiser and a friend who donated to that project, like, texted me after kicking themselves for having paid the tip for it. So, it's there. It has some controversy to it. People don't like it. People do like it, whatever. So there's no transparency about how much money and how many organizations made any money from that endeavor as it was. That was one. Two, which was really something I only noticed this morning, but I thought about it yesterday, and I remembered it from other controversies, was where they posted about this was on GoFundMe Pro. GoFundMe Pro is their nonprofit subsidiary, let's call it, right? GoFundMe Pro on LinkedIn has about, I don't know, 3,000 plus followers. GoFundMe is over 150,000 followers. So where they posted their apologies was on a much smaller account where only the insiders of the field might actually see it, right? And where people posted their comments and who they tagged was not GoFundMe Pro, it was GoFundMe. And so to me, that still stinks because that means they're still trying to be uber strategic and careful about apologizing, but not apologizing in block capital letters, apologizing in small little letters and saying that we apologize, and then they move on. The only reason I know anything like have thought about this was because during the course of all the stuff that's going on in the Middle East and people are posting retractions, it's always interesting to see where they post their retractions on stories that, if at all, or their apologies. They'll bury it on the 16th page of the newspaper kind of thing, right? So this was interesting to me, which basically says to me, they're sort of owning it, but not completely owning, which goes back to your point. And then the biggest thing is they didn't shut it down, right? It's like, it's still there. And eventually it'll shut itself down assuming anybody pays attention to it. But they didn't finish. They didn't say, this was a bad idea. We're sorry. We're going to cut a check to all the organizations for the amounts of money that were raised through our platform. They have the money, they can handle it, right? And we're shutting down the program. They didn't do that. They said basically you can come and claim your page. If you don't claim your page after 30 days, right, it'll be de-indexed. Congratulations. But it's like half a job. Half a job on this is no job. And so the language, they said they're very sorry, which, by the way, you can write that better. I mean, very is not a word you want to use. Come on, goodness gracious. Okay. But so to me, the apology, even though they finally got and they got what they wanted, which was the National Council of Nonprofits accepting their apology, as if that means anything.
Okay. So it's time for my hot take on this. I wish I could do a good Stephen A. Smith or Skip Bayless impersonation. I could say this in really strong terms and upset a lot of people.
Do it. Do it. Go for it.
I don't think I
can.
Say
it both ways. Let's see how it plays, and then I'll cut one out.
All right. Okay, here's my hot take. This was much worse in theory than it was in practice. This was not so bad in practice. This is a terrible look for GoFundMe. It shows that they do not understand nonprofits at all. They have totally lost the trust. No consent. They should not have done this. We just spent how long? Half hour lambasting them for this. I don't take back a single word that I said. I wonder how much money was lost to nonprofits because of this. And the reason that I say this is mainly one of the things that I noticed that I really found fascinating was on the LinkedIn page, which I spent an embarrassingly long amount of time just looking through the comments because I was so fascinated by it. And one of the things that jumped out to me when scrolling through those comments is, I don't know, it felt like 9 out of 10 of all of the comments were from fundraising consultants, people adjacent to the field, but not CEOs and directors of development. I didn't see, occasionally I saw a director of development up in arms, but I didn't see people saying, we didn't know there was thousands of dollars sitting in this account until we looked, and oh my goodness, please release the funds. I just wonder how bad this was in terms of dollars and cents.
I think that's fair. What I would say to you in response is they got lucky that way.
Lucky they did a bad job of people donating to their platform.
Yes.
On behalf of the organization.
Ironically, yes. Because it was caught or exposed, or whatever term you want to use, sooner rather than later. Here's a great example, okay? There was a hurricane this past week, right? People donate to hurricane relief in obscene amounts to organizations that they know, and in many cases, the organizations they don't know. How do they find them? They Google it. And so a person donated hard-earned money because they want to give hurricane relief, and that money went into a black hole of donations that no one ever saw. So it was never used, right? So GoFundMe lucked out in a certain sense by the timing of it exposure. The fact that when they actually did it in the first place, they promoted it rather poorly. And so it didn't become a bigger deal at the time, where they were, you know, even running ads like Google ads or whatever to promote it, or, SEO or placement or anything like that, or even just, dropping a cookie so that you can follow people around. I mean, the zillion people if they have that many people coming to their platform on a day-to-day basis, goodness gracious, they should have had a gazillion donations on their platform. They didn't, right? At least I don't think they did. Yeah, a little bit it's, bluster, I would say. You're right. I didn't see nonprofit leaders either coming out. The stuff that they were writing was mostly, this is super annoying and it's
Yes, absolutely.
more work than I need to deal with. Is this another thing that I didn't do that I now have to deal with and my board's going to ask me about? And come on, please help me and stop hurting me and making my life more difficult than it already is. I definitely, I definitely agree with you on that. And I would say that the typical average person donor probably didn't notice it happened. And as a couple people pointed out to me privately, it never hit the main press. So it wasn't a big story. Had it been a story on GoFundMe where they were raising money for hurricane relief and $100 million was raised and it disappeared, then you would have seen it and heard about it, because a senator or somebody would have raised where'd all the money go, like they do on occasion, what they do with Haiti relief when the money's just disappeared. But because it was inside inside baseball for the nonprofit community, I would agree with you on some level that it was more annoyance and bluster than it was in terms of practice, short of knowing how much money actually exchanged hands there and how much money is now sitting in accounts or in that PayPal giving fund, I think is where they put it, that's going to go unclaimed for an extended period of time. That doesn't mean that that it's okay. I would say that from the standpoint of the community, forgiving them so quickly bothers me. And I don't know how many people were using them to begin with for their nonprofits. I certainly wouldn't recommend it going forward because I think that trust piece takes time to fix. And truth be told, this was the part, like from a tech standpoint, as a project or a product idea, it's a good idea. Better executed, it's not a bad idea to have pages for all the nonprofits that are out there. Like, to me, it was like, oh, let's set up these pages before they go live. Let's email. Like, let me just play this out for a second, right? Here's how I would have done it. I have the capability to scrape every page on the internet. So I can find every organization. I can scrape their story, their address, their EIN, right? Their leadership, the whole thing, imagery, all that stuff. And I can build through AI, donate pages for every single one of them. Before going live, because you have all that information, you can take 30 days and email every single one of them. Again, it doesn't require somebody pressing send on every email, right? Your GoFundMe, I'm sure you have a pretty good email marketing system that you use. And you could email every one of the executives and say, we're launching this project. The reason we're launching this project is we want to help nonprofits raise more money because of our SEO, because of all the reasons that we just described in the negative. It's launching in 30 days. Here is the link to claim your page. We will then attach the donation end of it to your bank account or whatever it is. And then boom, it becomes an extension of your donate page rather than something else. Like, that's not a bad idea. But the whole hubris, we know better, we're going to collect the money and keep it until you find out about it, that totally, messed up the whole thing. And so, so many different aspects of this really bother me. That's one of them, which I hadn't really heard other people say, but I'm saying it is as much, and as you said it, like maybe it's more bluster than the practice of it. To me, it's like, shoot, you screwed up a really good idea and now nobody can do it.
Yeah, because they're essentially they had three options and they took the worst one. One is to offer people to opt in, which is what you're suggesting. Two, they could have offered people to opt out, but instead they just
Did it.
didn't offer people the option to opt out. And that like, so like, I think a lot of, I mean, just even again, scrolling through the LinkedIn comments, a lot of people's issue with it was like, how do you have permission to do this? Like
Right.
no one gave you permission to do it. So even just a heads up to say, we have done this. If you don't want us to do it, click this button would have been better than what they did. It just was it was a debacle. It
Right.
really
I would
was.
bring it even down. If you bring it down to like a personal level, if I decided I wanted to raise money for some random charity, right? I could, right? I could set up a page, collect money, and then send it and say, hey, I don't know you, you don't know me, but I love the work that you do. Coats for the homeless. I just raised 10 grand because in a basketball tournament that I ran, and here's the money, everybody would take the money, right? Because at no point did you represent your work as you're the organization. It was just you raising money for an organization, right? I just did one recently, small one. I had permission, but like all the asks were coming from me personally on behalf of an organization. And so, it wasn't like a big deal. Like there's a ton of ways to do these kinds of things where it's legal and it makes sense and it doesn't have all of the corruptible slash terrible slash, destructive slash finish out that sentence in terms of the descriptives you want to use for what they did here. But I would say one other thing, like if they opened a business, right, using all that information from another business, they would get sued and shut down in a day,
Yep.
right? Like, think about it. Like if they opened a franchise of, take your pick franchise in the United States, food franchise. I don't want to endorse any single one of them since I don't eat any of them. But or a clothing franchise, right? And they just opened up a store, an online store, and started to collect money and sell product, they would get shut down in 5 seconds and sued for much money, more money than it's worth, which is part of why it bothers me that it sort of just disappeared and there was no consequence to them as a company. I don't think anyone lost their job. So it just, on some level, petered out. Yeah, I think your hot take probably would have landed much harder if you had said it much harder. But I definitely, from the standpoint of, as you think about it, like 2 or 3 weeks later, which is why, I don't know if you saw it, I posted this morning, I asked if anyone knew if there was any transparency around the dollars because that piece just disappeared. Like people, in theory, donated to those pages, and the only way you get the money was if you opt into the page. If you opt out of the page, they can't send you the money, which is wrong. They could write a check or wire it over. So, like, there's no awareness ultimately about the actual dollar impact of what they did other than the annoyance. And it just, to me, is like, I always feel like our industry, like the nonprofit industry, is always sitting on the cusp of some sort of corruption. So like that, like just another corruption that's sort of around the bend that we're not aware of, right? So if it's like we said before, collecting for things that aren't real, like the cancers or the hurricane kind of stuff, that's one. If it's people who are grifting off the top, that might be two. This is three. Using tech, I think tech as a piece of the corruption is only going to grow.
Yeah. 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 I was trying to think of like what your headline can be. How can I say it stronger? Like nonprofit podcaster says GoFundMe scandal, not that big a deal. Like there you go. There's your headline. Everyone will
That
click and
yeah, that would be a good that'd be a good title for the episode. Like, what do you think of the GoFundMe thing? I don't know. It was like a thing. It was a thing, but like, yeah, like okay. So just give me like one final, like, let's end this on a positive if we can. What's like a one takeaway from this for the nonprofit leader or the tech person in nonprofit in terms of like where to on from this?
I think that there's in a lot of ways, I'm tempted to advise organizations to try and keep it simple. And I think that they saw this as a complexity that was just not worth the headache. But I know that we want to give donors the opportunity to give in a way that makes sense for them. And we should always be looking for opportunities to do that. And at the same time, we have so many systems that are talking to each other, our CRM and emails and the receipts and the accounting. And when you introduce another tool that doesn't talk to any of these other tools, then just that piece alone would have been enough for, I think, a lot of nonprofit leaders to say, I don't want to do this. Forget about the permission and the marketing and the tipping and the numerous other things that are problematic about what GoFundMe did. Just the piece of adding this huge other element, it's got to be worth it from a financial standpoint to add a new tool to your toolbox, because we got a lot of systems that are all communicating with each other. And that was one piece that I took from it, is just like that level, introducing a level of complexity has to be done with an awareness that there's got to be a payoff at the end. It was just, again, from the feedback that I saw from all of these comments. I love the LinkedIn comments so much, because we don't often get a chance to talk about something this specific to our field and hear directly from the people that are being affected. Like, we don't
Yeah.
have that collective water cooler where we can all talk about this. And social media, in a lot of ways, is that water cooler where we can all get around and say, so what do you think about this? And that was something that I saw a lot, is like, and you had mentioned this earlier, that people just didn't want the headache of adding that layer of complexity, simply because they didn't think that it was worth it to. And that stuck out to me.
Yeah. My last takeaway goes a little back to what you said earlier, I think, is there's a humility that has to exist in these kinds of things, and a healthy respect for the different customer bases that you are working with. And because of that level of humility and respect, talking to them is not a bad thing. And so, yes, as to your point about Ford and jobs and all that other stuff, for sure, I get it. At the same time, there's still a real value in communicating out good ideas and bad ideas and accepting the response that people have to your good ideas and your bad ideas. They're just ideas. Like, there's no harm if the idea disappears and no one ever hears about it again, if it's a bad idea. So I think that that's, for me, the biggest piece here. There's some really, really smart people in the industry, like really smart people who, and who know tech also, and who know the product line and all that other stuff, who would have been an easy conference call to just get them on, float the idea, talk it through, and then come out with a way to do it or not do it at all, and then move on from here and leave us all to talk about something else in the opening episode of our seasons in our pod. So to me, like, that's the major takeaways. Like, really communicate that when you can, and over communicate it where necessary, so that you try to do your best to get it right, even if ultimately maybe you get it wrong a little bit. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Fantastic.
Okay, that's episode 1 of season 2, where Raimy's like on the whole GoFundMe thing as the biggest takeaway. Like and subscribe to the podcast. Shout us out with any ideas, thoughts, questions, issues, guests, whatever that may be. And stay tuned as we continue to grow the audience for this podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with us for so long. Have a glorious day.